In this episode,
I reckon 10 years from now, everybody will be renewably powered. Either that or they'll be broke.
The mindset changes as soon as we talk about heat pumps. Like, I don't want to hear a single thing.
The last thing you want is a battery coming through the ceiling.
She's upset, Mars, that it's not noisier.
Oh, don't turn that on now. It's not, the sun's not shining. And
The car becomes your power station.
Mars, I've got a solution for you, mate.
hi and welcome to another episode of Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and today we're diving into common mistakes in heat pump and battery installations and how to avoid them. Joining me are Ken Bone from Ultimate Renewable Supplies, Neil MacGregor from Orium Energy, James Clark from Elite Services Group, and Laurence Bradbury, longtime friend of the show. Welcome everybody. Before we get started, we'd like to thank Orium Energy for sponsoring this episode. With over 13 years of experience in the renewable energy market, Orium has been a pioneer in delivering cutting-edge solar PV and energy storage solutions. As certified premium partners of Tesla and SolarWatt, they specialize in designing bespoke renewable energy systems that not only reduce energy costs, but also provide exceptionally low-cost energy. Orium Energy's commitment to quality, innovation, and customer support is unmatched. From ground-mounted systems to in-roof installations, their expert team ensures every project meets the highest standards, backed by comprehensive insurance and dedicated energy consultants. Thank you, Orium Energy, for supporting our mission to explore sustainable energy solutions and for helping homeowners and businesses in the UK transition to a greener future. All right, James, do you want to get us going today? What is the most common mistake that you see homeowners make when choosing a heat pump? And also, what are the biggest issues that you see in the way that those heat pumps are installed?
I don't know if it's a customer making the actual choice of the heat pump and instead of just the installer making the choice for the heat pump. So obviously, it's the customer relies on the installer to make the right choice. The common mistakes that you see quite often is obviously oversizing of heat pumps. I don't know sometimes how high they get these numbers and, install a 14 when it should be a 7 kilowatt heat pump. I don't know if they've got some extra 14s on stock or something like that. I need to get rid of them. But yeah, sometimes it's a bit bewildering. Like we're playing by the same rules, same heat loss calculations. How does this get so high? So yeah, that is the most common mistake that you see in year in year at the moment.
What about you, Ken? You obviously go and see a lot of different sites. What are the biggest issues that you come across in terms of the way that heat pumps are being installed?
I would like to say most of the heat pumps that we come across now are generally installed in a better way. A lot of what I have to deal with, or the follow-up stuff that I have to deal with, especially after the customer's been in for a little while, is poor commissioning or poor setup or balancing issues. Maybe the weather curve needs adjusting. So straight away, on a commissioning basis, we will try and aim for a weather compensation settings that we feel from our calculations is the correct one. But very quickly, once the customer's in there and living with the actual unit, they start to get a feel and they start picking and poking at the system a little bit. And so there's a lot of fine tuning that's not always done after the initial install and commissioning. And so people can be left with years with systems that are still in factory settings.
Laurence, you had a heat pump installed quite a few years ago now. How involved were you during that installation process? So were you aware of any potential pitfalls, and how involved were you?
I was quite intimately involved in the specification, which is how I know Graham Hendra. He and I had several conversations. I tried actually to convince him to come round and do the heat loss calcs in my house, and he said, no, I don't do that anymore. Anyway, but he had installed already a red heat pump in his own house. So, and he'd actually made some videos on it, which was great. I had been doing research for like 2 or 3 years. I'll be honest, I was on the fence about heat pumps. I was like, yeah, I'm not sure it's really going to work. I've been running my gas boiler at 50 degrees. And then I knew when we got into minus temperatures that 50 degrees was definitely not going to work for this house. And despite what MCS tell you about changing all your radiators and doing this, that and the other, my design criteria was I don't want to change anything in my house. I want to just rip out the gas boiler and I'd like to put in a heat pump. So when Graham's videos came along with the red heat pump going to 65 degrees centigrade, I was like, yeah, I know that's going to work for me because I don't run my boiler that hot. I've got aluminium radiators, so you don't want to put 65 degrees through the radiators. I de-risked it enough that I was happy to just go for it. And I tell you what, I'm so happy with it. I'm like, it's so much better than gas boilers. So much better because the house is warm all the time. I switch it on in October, I switch it off in March, and all the time, 3 o'clock. I was working at 3 o'clock this morning, absolutely roasting in here. It was bloody brilliant. Yeah, so I was intimately involved. I did a lot of research. But yeah, I'm super happy. Graham Hendra still speaks to me, which is great.
So you say you were intimately involved. What does that actually mean? How kind of hands-on were you when the actual team came in to fit the heat pump? Were you involved in the design process? Were you designing the installation? How far did it extend?
Yeah, I like to just put myself firmly in the supervisory position when it comes to. I didn't wield a screwdriver or a spanner, but also I didn't really know. I mean, I knew the concepts. So Graham did a great video with Dr. Jason Castle, who designed the unit. And I also got the thermal store that Jason Castle, they specified that with it. It's like a cylinder, but a thermal store sort of combined. My background's in technology as well, so not in heating or anything like that. But obviously, when it came to actually setting it up, and I have to say, Ken, that I'm aware of a lot of people that have had heat pump installs where people are just installing them like gas boilers. I think that's still a massive issue. And actually, the other thing was, I can switch mine quite easily into gas boiler mode. And when we set mine up originally, it was bloody freezing in here. So I immediately set the water temperature to 55 degrees, override the weather compensation, let's blast the house with heat, and within 30-40 minutes I'm up to temperature. It's nice it's got a gas boiler mode, but you don't want to run it like that all the time. It's great if you're going on holiday or something and switch the thing off and you just want to get some heat into the house. But no, low and slow all the way. Definitely.
So, Neil, we've spoken a lot on this show about the mistakes and the blunders that are sometimes associated with heat pump installations, but we've not really spoken about batteries. So, what are the biggest issues that homeowners face in terms of mistakes or installation issues that they can face when it comes to installing a battery?
The first thing is that the customer's perception of what the battery is going to be doing for them. If you want the battery principally because you've got power cuts and you want backup, many systems are sold which don't give backup for the whole house, and people are surprised to find that in the event of a power cut, when they're scrambling around in the dark looking for a candle, they've got to manually switch something over, which is sort of counterproductive. So they need to understand whether that battery system they've got is going to protect the whole house. And they also need to understand that to make the very most of the battery, they're going to be using what are called time of use tariffs. A bit like the old Economy 7, but several times a day you can charge your battery up. And it links beautifully into heat pumps, because there are tariffs out there today which give you 3 opportunities to charge up your battery. Those same 3 periods can be used to run your heat pump, and it's economical for all.
James, when you obviously also now have started fitting batteries, I think. So when you go to a property and you see a homeowner that's interested in putting in a heat pump and supporting that with a battery, how does one propose sizing the battery in relation to the heat pump?
We predominantly fit solar, heat pump and battery all day, every day. The installation team this week is doing all 3 technologies, and we're finding a lot of customers are installing heat pumps and solar and battery at the same time. The consideration that you need to take when buying both the products, and so obviously especially the batteries, that we don't want to oversell or give the wrong product to the customer, saying, customer says, well, do I need 30 kilowatt? Or do you actually need 30 kilowatt? The last thing that we want is half of the battery, which is a lead paperweight and never gets used, dispersed, just, charged up and never gets used at the same time. So luckily there's a lot of batteries on the market, which is where you can add to the battery and keep adding. So you can start with 5 kilowatt, add more, another 5 kilowatt, and so on and so forth. So if it's a 2-bedroom, 2 up, 2 down new build, 4 panels on the roof, small heat pump, you're like, well, maybe a 5 kilowatt. Let's start with a 5 kilowatt. You certainly don't want to, potentially a 20 kilowatt. And then you can add to that, where if it's an older building, older property, bigger, higher demands, then we can size accordingly for that as well. So you can kind of gauge on the property where a battery lies and where you want to install. But as I say, the worst thing you want to do is go, right, let's just go for 2 Tesla Powerwalls, 26 kilowatt, and the second one just doesn't get used, and the customer's going to be ringing you up saying, why have you sold me this extra product? So we would rather err on the side of caution and then go back and install additionals instead of overselling in the first place.
So Ken, this is not something that we advocate for any of our viewers, but you have DIY'd your own battery, which I have found absolutely mind-blowing to actually have followed that story. And we're not saying to anybody to do that. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about your system?
So I started building my own systems from COVID, really, and I was trying to give a second life to old battery technologies. But as my house has progressed and I've become a bit more data nerdy and watching the grid and watching what my solar's doing, the time of use tariffs that are now more available than they were a few years ago, I tend to pick up used EV battery packs, repurpose those now. Going on from that, I then, as Neil was saying, that because of the time of use, I'm now treating also my house as a battery. So I charge in the winter months. There's a bit of a flip between summer and winter, and Laurence will know this as well. I mean, he's got loads of PV more than myself. So in the winter, I try to make use of that nighttime cheap tariff. Charge the car, charge the battery, preload the house a little bit with the heat pump, take a little bit of hit on the efficiency, but you can maybe put another 5-10 degrees on your hot water, which means the following day that hot water will last longer when the rates are more expensive. So I'm trying to play with things like that and just trying to get the best out of it. But even the days we've been having this week, my batteries are they come on at 5 a.m. and they're sustaining me up until 9-10 o'clock at night now. Now the sun's coming out. So the heat pumps got the foot off the gas because the sun's out and the house doesn't need so much heat. So that's not working so hard. And then the battery can sustain us throughout the whole day. And there will be a time where I will just turn off the nighttime charge and just leave the battery to trickle charge during the day through the summer with the solar panels. And obviously during the summer, the heat pump's not really doing heating. Your daylight's much longer, your daylight hours are much longer, so you're not using so much lighting. You might be eating more salads than cooking meals, for example, because it's summertime. So all those little bits and pieces help.
What about you, Laurence? So, I mean, you guys kind of specialize in batteries. So if you are going to an existing property that might or might not have a heat pump, but they've got solar PV, how do you help those homeowners actually size their battery correctly so that it's not undersized or oversized?
First of all, it comes down to usage. How much do you use in a day? We typically also have metrics for how much solar you need. I mean, I've found like a 5 to 7 to 1 ratio. So 5 to 7 kilowatts of solar per battery is my mantra. We're looking at say 5 megawatts a year. That's one battery. So you could take it over a year, you could take it over a day. I mean, oftentimes I say to customers, don't worry about your bill. Read the meter at 12 o'clock today and then read the meter at 12 o'clock tomorrow. That's good enough for me. The likelihood that you're using 3 megawatts this year and 15 megawatts next year, unless you change something like installing an electric car and a heat pump and this, that and the other. So, even just 24 hours worth of use is typically enough for me to figure out what the customer needs. It's pretty simple.
Neil, there's a lot of thought process that comes to actually installing a heat pump in terms of where it should be positioned in a property. Are there similar guidelines for where a battery should and should not be installed?
There are guidelines, and the guidelines to a large extent are dictated, first of all, by the battery itself, whether it's rated for indoor and or outdoor use. Quite clearly, if it can't be installed outside, that's rather limiting. If you're looking for the finer points on installation, if you're going to go outside, you don't really want the battery in a very exposed area where it's going to be in sunlight all the time, because heat doesn't do any favors for batteries and for battery efficiency. And similarly, you don't want it to be getting terribly cold. There are many batteries on the market that begin to stutter a little bit when temperatures get down to low single figures. So, and for those batteries, you're better off inside something like an integral garage or utility area. They're the main considerations. The rest are really down to safety issues, access or egress, as it should be really. That you need to be able to get out of a door quickly if there's an emergency and that sort of thing. But other than that, it's fairly standard. You can put batteries in most locations, but not in confined spaces and not in lofts.
I was just going to ask that very same point, because I've started to see a lot more cases where people with smaller properties or smaller footprints where they're struggling to find a place are actually putting these batteries in lofts. And I would have thought that must be a definite no-no. So it's interesting that you should say
absolute no-no. If you actually think of it from, there's a multitude of reasons why you wouldn't want it. But in the unfortunate situation of there being a fire, the last thing you want is a battery coming through the ceiling,
which is very difficult to put out. Or impossible.
It is a problem because a lot of hybrid inverters have been put in lofts. So unless you're going to string the DC all the way down the house, like loft seems like a logical place. But I'm pretty sure that's against the regulations now.
Heat certainly does have a detrimental effect on both the inverters and batteries. No battery chemistry is 100% safe, but there are safer chemistries. But you just do not want to expose them to overheating, either by overcharging them or you put them in an environment that will basically make them heat up. And if you read the fine detail, if you buy a battery from wherever, if you read the fine detail, hopefully that information should be there. There will be an ambient temperature window of, you don't want to be past this point and you don't want to be above this point. So I agree with Neil Laurence. I know he did it for many, many years in the early days, putting inverters in lofts. And so the sensible place where we used to put the inverter in the loft, let's put the battery in the loft. But I think hopefully times are changing and they're being a bit more sensible about it now.
James, swinging back to heat pumps quickly. So we've spoken about noise on this podcast many times before. And thankfully, we're actually beginning to see fewer and fewer cases of people that are actually complaining about the noise emanating from them. And the ones that do complain are the ones that have actually had them wall mounted. So if somebody doesn't have the floor space, what advice would you give to that homeowner to ensure that their installer actually puts anti-vibration mounts onto those heat pumps to prevent any vibrations actually rattling through the walls?
Yeah, I mean, there's products on the market now that can help reduce the sound vibrating through the walls, anti-vibration mats and stuff like that you can put behind the brackets, which we do. Along with the heat pump being supplied, you get the anti-vibration feet. But a lot of the time with sound with heat pumps, it's about the commissioning, the control method behind the heat pump. One thing that makes a heat pump rev is by commissioning. So third-party thermostat clicking on, going, crikey, I've got to get back up a degree of temperature. I've really got to get going here. And that's what makes the sound. If the thing's low, slow, and continuous and just trickling along nicely, you don't get that sound, whether it be on a wall or on the ground. So it's not necessarily the placement. Obviously, it's a placement in the installation, but it's about the commissioning. And I'm going, let's make this thing cruise on motorway, low, slow, and continuous, trickling along, and that's not that's how you got to do it, so that fan doesn't rev. And that's what it's all about. It's the commissioning part and the inside part that's more integral to the actual outside part and the fitting part of it. What's quite funny and quite strange is that when we start talking about heat pumps as well, it's like, sound, and now everyone notices anything about sound in the property whatsoever. And you say to the customer, what was the sound before with the old boiler? The boiler turning off in the middle of the night, the water rushing through the radiators. But as soon as we start talking about heat pumps, the expectations are to be, I don't want to hear a single thing. I don't want to hear a pin drop. But yeah, it's very strange that the mindset changes as soon as we talk about heat pumps. I don't want to hear a single thing. But that old boiler was chugging along for 20 years, and you didn't mind that going. So obviously, outdoor location, the heat pumps are a completely separate matter. But indoors, yeah, it's quite strange, really.
I didn't hear mine. I didn't hear mine very much, James. I don't really think. I don't even really think about it, actually.
Do you have any circulation noises inside your property? Like in terms of hearing the water rushing around or anything like that?
I think occasionally, I think maybe perhaps if it's done a defrost cycle or something like that, maybe it's just washing one way and then washing back. I really, yeah, occasionally I hear it, but I mean, it's running every single minute of every single day. That circulation pump is running. So, I switch it on in October. I switch it off at the end of March. My mum just had a heat pump fitted, and I have to say, she hasn't said, she said even when it's creating hot water and she's sitting in the room next to her where it's installed, she doesn't even hear it. That was the one thing she said. Everybody told me this was going to be noisy, but I can't hear a damn thing. She's upset, Mars, that it's not noisier.
Are you new to heat pumps and feeding lost? Then From Zero to Heat Pump Hero helps you understand, operate, and optimize your system. No jargon, just simple practical advice from one homeowner to another. Take control of your heating and save energy. Get your copy now. Link in the description. Ken, so going back to positioning of the actual heat pump units themselves, we've seen there's a lot of properties that have got little alleyways where people have put, they might have their bins or something like that there. And the heat pumps run okay, but during the course of the winter, they might move some garden furniture or obstructions a little bit closer to it, and they start to see performance drops, even though they don't push it right up against the actual heat pump. Can you explain why people shouldn't be doing that?
You're basically, if you start moving things closer to the heat pump, especially on the the condenser side of it, the coiled side of the heat pump, you're starting to block air. It needs to breathe. And going back to the design stuff, if you design in flow temperature, if your design flow temperature is too high, that unit needs a lot of air. The unit's working a lot harder because it has to deliver that higher flow temperature. So it needs to breathe all that air in, and this is why you will potentially get problems if you enclose it in, or if there isn't enough clearance in the front. Because even if there's not enough clearance at the front, the air coming off of it is so fast, it will bounce off what's ever in front of it, and it could potentially recirculate back into the unit. So that's why they say they need to have good clearances around to breathe. So yeah, you basically do not want to be parking any furniture or any flower pots with trays on top. I went to one where guy thought he was doing quite well. He put a bit of like DP membrane over the heat pump on top, and then he had this big tray of flower pots, but the membrane was hanging about 3 foot down the back of the heat pump, and it was like, no mate, you can't do that. That's not going to work very well. Yeah, we had a little conversation, but yeah, those sort of simple things. You don't put anything at the back of the heat pump, anything on the side of the heat pump. It starts boxing it in, even though you're not doing it purposely. You're thinking, I'm just going to park that there for now, or put the bins there because that seems a good place. You could actually be hindering how that performs.
Just to reinforce what Ken's saying there about recirculation, the idea is you're taking latent heat out of the air. You can't do that twice. If you create a circulation of the expelled air coming back in again, you're really on a hiding to nothing, because you can't keep taking out of that air. You need fresh air that's got latent heat in it.
Laurence, we're beginning to see a lot more movements on our forums with people that are now starting to get a real interest in actually getting batteries installed. And the one question that we're beginning to see a lot more of is how, if they install the batteries, how do they prevent themselves from mismanaging battery charging and discharging cycles?
Well, I can really only speak to the one that we do at the moment, which is the powerwall. We will be doing a BMW branded later this month, Miles, which is going to be very, very interesting. More about that later. The control mechanism on the powerwall has something termed a utility rate plan, and in 30-minute increments you can set your peak, off peak on Cozy, which Octopus Cozy, which is the tariff that Neil mentioned earlier, where you can cycle the battery 3 times a day. You literally have about, I don't know, 7 or 8 time periods. So you got off peak, mid-peak, peak. I mean, it's, actually I was trying to talk to someone over the phone through setting that up, and that's quite tricky. But actually, there's even apps out there now, so you can, Agile. Do you remember Agile, Miles? Agile is a tariff that Octopus did about, and still do, but about 4 years ago, and we had lots of people that I call naked agilers. So basically, the energy was cheap outside of the 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. period, but these guys had no batteries whatsoever. They would just stop using power at 4 o'clock in the, I'm not cooking my dinner until after 7 because it's 30 pence a kilowatt, which is completely bonkers to me. Even the latest integration went live yesterday. There's a Intelligent Go via Octopus where you give them control of your car charging. Well, the Powerwall was never aware of that, so it might charge at 6 o'clock in the evening. You'd end up draining the battery. But now there's an integration with the Octopus app, so that the Powerwall is now aware that Octopus are charging your car at 6 o'clock, and they stop the battery from discharging. So tech was always going to be there to solve the problem. It's just taken a while.
Yeah, just going on from the question, what Laurence was saying about, mismanaging the battery, and coming to installation, what the pitfalls can be for a customer. And it's down to another good commission from a battery installer, a solar installer as well. I went to a property last week, and it was actually about a heat pump, broken heat pump, never worked, terrible installation, ran 15 mil throughout the house, just awful, just tagged it onto original boiler installation. Went into the garage, and he had 19 kilowatt worth of battery storage in his garage. He said, I think this works. He's older, elderly couple. I said, I think this works. I said, well, are you on a time of use tariff? You had no solar. Do you want a time of use tariff? He said, no, I'm just on the standard fixed British gas. I was like, well, that's just a lead paper way. That's not doing anything at all. So I actually spent 2 hours with the customer, ringing up British Gas, cancelling British Gas, ringing up Octopus, because they didn't do like an Octopus Cozy. They only did I think it was one for cars maybe, or something like that. It was not very good, the tariff for them. So I said, got onto Octopus Cozy, got them onto Octopus, set up the Octopus Cozy tariff, and then started scheduling, going onto the battery app and started scheduling for Octopus Cozy. And this was the thing that the installer should have gone through it with the customer at the end of the installation. So unfortunately, this customer thought, I've got it installed, it's plug and play, and it's going to start saving me energy. So it's just about the commission is just as important on battery side as it is on a heat pump side. And quite quickly, you're just not getting the benefits of it. The beauty of batteries sometimes as well is we went and had an installation where they couldn't have solar panels. It was a listed building, couldn't have it on the front of the house, never going to happen. So we just installed a bank of batteries. She just charges it on the, and she had an EV, so she charges it on that tariff during the night and then releases it during the day, and just extends that cheaper period throughout the morning.
Even if you didn't have solar, but you had, let's say you had the Intelligent Go tariff because you've got an EV, a 10 kilowatt battery charged at 7p overnight is 70p. A week, that's £4.90. If you use that 10 kilowatts without having a battery every day at 27p, that's £18.90 a week. So just by having a 10 kilowatt battery and playing the time of use game, you could be saving nearly £14 a week. That's without even solar.
And sometimes solar isn't a good return investment. It's on a slate roof. The rigs are going to be $2,000. It's, I can only get 7 panels up there. It's like going, look, this is just not good return investment with the solar. You're looking at batteries. Battery technology has come on so much in the last few years. We're installing batteries now where it can predict the weather forecast and going, hold on, let's back up off the solar today, or let's increase it. Let's charge more in and around them weather patterns. It's really, really clever technology out there.
That's an interesting point that James raises there, Neil, in terms of when it comes to renewables, a lot of homeowners look at ROI. And for ourselves, when we actually put our heat pump and solar in about 6 or 7 years ago, batteries were so hideously expensive that we actually approached that from a return on investments perspective, where we just knew that we were never going to get our money back on that. Is it a fair point for people that are considering batteries to factor in payback periods?
I think with all renewables, you will have people the accountants amongst us, or the account-minded people amongst us, who want to look at ROI and see that as the driver as to whether they go down a particular route. And there's a strong argument for it, but there's also a future-proofing element that you can't deal with in terms of ROI. Where are prices going to go from here? If your belief is that prices in real terms are going to remain fairly constant, ROI is a valid mechanism. But if you fear, as many do, that prices, in part because we're greening the economy, are going to rise in time, then ROI itself is difficult to put into that equation. You've got to add in the other factors. If you're in an area where you have power cuts, do you want that? Do you want control of your power going forward? Are you looking to earn something from your solar over and above what's being generated on the roof? Are you prepared to export electricity at peak periods and be paid for it? Because increasingly we are seeing some of the energy providers incentivizing both reduction and consumption periods, hours at a time, where they're paying or you're saving money. And all of these factors complicate ROI. So ROI by itself, it's a good starting point, but there's a lot more to it than that.
So Ken, Neil mentioned future-proofing yourself there. I know that you spend a lot of time looking at, so you have an interest in it in terms of how the grid can cope going forward as more and more people electrify. So can you tell us how batteries can actually play a role in both future-proofing yourself as well as trying to protect the grid?
There's a lot of talk that the grid can't cope. So the actual national grid is actually it can cope with what's going on. I think there is a fact that we're actually using less energy than we were in the 70s. What the problem is obviously we've got bits of the network that are not quite or could be under strain going forward. The grid has a peak and trough every day. Every day it cycles. So in the day we're into the 42,000 megawatts, and at night time we're down to 24,000 megawatts usage. And that constant peak and trough is what the utility companies use, like Octopus, for their intelligent go. So that's why the rates are cheaper at night time. So if you took that 10 kilowatt battery that everybody has, and they were on a tariff, and you multiplied that by millions, you then have got quite a stable capacity that can help the grid. So we're taking the strain off the day because that 10 kilowatt helps during the daytime period, and we're leveling it out on the night time. So basically we're trying to get the grid, instead of going up and down, we're trying to get that line, or the grid would love us to get that line eventually, as smooth as possible. Vehicle to grid cars, battery storage, preloading your house with a heat pump in that cheaper period. All these things help. If you multiply them by millions, they will actually make a big dent into the grid system.
Laurence, Ken mentioned vehicle to grid there, and I'm not a big battery guy, I never have been. But the one thing that I've heard bantered around for what feels like forever is vehicle to grid's coming, but nothing seems to be happening. Why is that process, which seems to be for me, a relatively simple one in that, you've got a car, which is just an enormous battery. Why is this taking so long to implement?
I'm not convinced the vehicle to grid is the thing that everybody else thinks it is. I mean, batteries are definitely what's required to help balance out the grid. There's no question. I've heard customers telling me that they're going to buy a Nissan Leaf and run their house off it because it's cheaper than buying a battery. And this, yeah, great, but maybe it ain't got a control system, which could be a bit of a flaw. Personally, I don't think it's going to work because, you probably, most of the time I'm out and about in the car when the grid's going to need the power, right? 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. is the time where that could work if you're going to use vehicle to grid. But I'm sure the technology's there to do it. I think the early cars didn't have bi-directional chargers because they never expected you to get the energy out of the battery and do something else. But they're it's easy enough to engineer a bi-directional charger, so it will happen more and more. The rate of electric vehicle adoption is actually increasing, Miles, and as long as the manufacturers are putting these sort of bi-directional chargers in, it will be there. But I personally think that that stationary storage is really what's going to help the grid, not cars.
Yeah, just going on from that point, I'm not a massive fan of these vehicles. Are great. You try to explain to your wife, going, "Well, right, the battery's outside, and it's going to, load the house, charge the house, discharge the house, and stuff like that." The first question is, well, what if we have an emergency? If you've got an emergency, you need to get into that car, and there's no charge in it, then it's going to be a bit of a problem. So them kind of conversations to be had as well is going, do you really want, that happening in your car? So, and going back to the other point you were saying about future-proofing you with batteries, that is a really good kind of sentence, because you're not future-proofing your home. You get the luxury of a battery. You can take it with you. If you move home, you can have that thing uninstalled and put it to the next house. So people saying, I've got it's whatever, thousands of pounds for a battery, you can take it to every single house along the way and keep going, which is a luxury of a battery.
Are you thinking about getting a heat pump? Then don't get caught out by a bad installation. Bodge Buster is your essential guide to asking the right questions and spotting red flags before it's too late. Written from real homeowner experience, this book gives you the knowledge to avoid costly mistakes and make informed decisions. Get Bodge Buster today in print or for Kindle, link in the description. So we had a big storm about 5 or 6 years ago, and we got 6 kilowatts of solar on the roof. And it was really interesting that we were without power for about 2 or 3 days, and all of our neighbors were like, "Oh, you guys are so lucky because you got the PV on the roof, so you guys are okay." And it's like, obviously guys, it doesn't work that way. So if anybody wants to future-proof themselves to prevent themselves from not having power during power outages, what is the solution to that, Laurence? And are those solutions powerful enough to be able to, for example, boil your kettle?
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness gracious me, Miles. I mean, this has been available since 2019. I mean, we're in 2025. So I can tell you exactly when it came out. I think I put my solution in I think November 2019. What you're talking about is what they call islanding. So basically, if you have a power cut, your solar inverter is required to disconnect from the grid so that the poor chap who's trying to get your power back up again doesn't get your electrons, giving him a little bit of a shock. So all you really need is an electronic relay at the grid end that closes circuit on the house, and then your solar and your batteries and everything. I mean, Miles, I've got a solution for you, mate. I must come and see you. I must come and educate you on these solutions.
Building on that, I suppose that's where vehicle to grid falls down, because I would assume then if you did have a car connected, you wouldn't be able to necessarily draw that power out of the car to run your house. Or am I completely misunderstanding that?
If you've got a bidirectional setup, then there's no reason why you can't draw from the car. That's part of the idea. It's having the right system that you can have the islanding. So you disconnect from the grid, but you become your own grid, as it were. The car becomes your power station.
So, Miles, what we're basically doing is we're in the gateway, or the device that interfaces with the grid. We're basically islanding it there. So we're proactively cutting off the grid and closing circuit on the house. And that's basically what allows the solar and the battery to work in conjunction. I mean, I had a customer that had his main fuse out for a week. And actually, what was really interesting was when the battery gets full, there's no grid. The G100 device ups the frequency. So we get a 50 hertz pulse down our power lines from the grid, which tells you that it's available. It ups the frequency to 51 hertz, and that tells the solar inverter to stop producing any energy because there's nowhere for it to go. It's fascinating. We did loads of testing with it when it first came out. It's really cool.
If somebody has got a reasonably big PV array, I'll use ourselves as an example. So we got 6 kilowatts. Our base load in this house, we'll just call it 1 kilowatt hour. During kind of April through September, October, you could potentially be topping up that battery the whole day. So technically speaking, you would not pay for electricity at all for a good 6 months out of the year.
Correct. In fact, I can honestly tell you, I have several customers who, once they've had this solution, decide they want to disconnect from the grid, because you can actually, there's a thing on your phone. You can actually say, go off grid. So I spoke to a customer yesterday who said, I've got SSE are going to switch the power off to my house at 9 o'clock. So I'm going to go off grid at 8:55, and then when they tell me it's come back on again, I'll go back on grid. I find it staggering that people just, no, I want to disconnect from the grid. I don't want to be part of the grid today. It's a new level of recluse.
I want to be there one day. I want to be out in the sticks with as off grid as much as I possibly can. Hence why I'm slowly accumulating batteries.
So what's the biggest thing that you've learned from your system, Ken, in terms of, have you had to adjust your lifestyle in any way to be able to work with the batteries, or has everything just been relatively seamless?
But my house battery was quite small. I did have to play the, oh, don't turn that on now. It's not, the sun's not shining, and I'll only put the washing on between 2 and 4, and I was driving my family nuts. Don't put the hot water on. Now I've got more capacity, so I've got a much larger window for them to do those things in the household. So it's not such a big thing anymore. And back then I was playing with Agile Tariff and stuff. So, that peak window between like 4 and 7 of the evening, it's like, as you say, I'm not cooking me dinner because it's before 7 p.m. and, stuff like that. But then you put the oven and the microwave on and the kettle goes on all at the same time. You have to be into it to get the best out of it. You have to manage it. As Neil and Laurence says, there are devices and inverters and battery systems that are much more clever at doing this for you. I've chosen the hard route myself, but there you go. So I have to manage it and automate it myself a little bit. It's great. I love it. I absolutely love it. Trying to get the best out of both my heat pump and my battery. So I want to get to the point where even in mid coldest winter, I'm running my house basically off grid for about 80% of the day. That's where I want to get to.
If the heat pumps, the heat pumps are the legs and the solar's the arms, the battery right in the middle is the heart of it all, then it definitely pulls all the technologies and it makes it all sing and dance a little bit better. You get a lot more flexibility with renewable products with that battery right in the middle of things. So it just definitely ties everything in together. Battery, the kind of standalone technologies, heat pump and solar, until you get the battery, and it kind of all sings together. So it is out of all the products, it's probably one of the most important.
So Neil, for those people that are watching this episode considering either a heat pump or battery storage, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give them before installing both?
I think the most important thing in all of this, we're going to say this anyway, is go to somebody who's got experience of installing the systems, speak to clients of theirs to find out how confident the client is now, having had the battery installed or the heat pump installed. References in this area are so important because, as with so many things, as heat pumps and batteries become in vogue, an awful lot of people will come into the market who are no longer selling double glazing. They're no longer doing various other fast buck exercises, and they think now they're experts in these two fields. Speak to other people, get their referral, get their references.
James, similar question to you. So in terms of, when you fit a heat pump, I know we talk about MCS, getting an MCS accredited installer and all the rest of it. If you do come across an installer that fits heat pumps and they are also trying to install batteries for you, is there some sort of checks that you can actually run on them to verify that they are a good battery installer?
Obviously there's the governing bodies that need to be part of. Tesla do a training course and stuff like that. They're not easy courses. They are good courses. So if you're fitting a Tesla, have you been on the Tesla training course? There are stipulations of them batteries as well to make sure that you are doing the correct job. So it's always saying, have you been on the training course for the brand that you are fitting? Really important. And it's knowing about them nuances and the commissioning part of that battery, of going, getting the best out of it. Tariffs, using whether it's working around the weather patterns and stuff like that. So it's definitely important to do them type of training.
And Ken, what do you think? What is the one piece of advice that you would give to somebody that's looking to install a battery?
Same as the previous James and Neil, Lawrence's. Try and go for a reputable company. Go and speak to previous customers. See if they got training in a certain product, or if they had training in a certain product, and they're not just buying some some cheap thing from a Chinese website or whatever. And it's the same with anything. The more qualified, hopefully the more qualified you are, proves that you're competent in doing what you're doing. But as time goes on, these connections, this family, as James put it, this body of different technologies working and bouncing off of each other and complementing each other is going to help everybody long term. It's very difficult, as we know, to find good installers just doing the heat pumps. So I'm guessing, as Neil said, there's going to be plenty. If someone sees a product, a area that they think they can make money in, they'll jump into it very quickly.
And same question and last word to you, Laurence. So what is your one piece of advice? And you can't say whatever Ken, James and Neil said.
No, I'm sitting here gleefully smiling inside myself because nobody said you need a smart meter. Number one, you need a smart meter. I'm sorry, Mars, you might not agree, buddy, but to get the best tariffs, you need a smart meter. And actually, Mars, I want to tell you, I'm going to ruin your day. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to do this, but had you bought the battery at the time you'd bought the battery, it would have paid for itself by now because of the fiscal drag between the fact that energy prices have gone up and you know, we've been selling solar for 13 years, and when it was a 12-year return on investment, it was a difficult sell. Now it's a 6-year return on investment. It's awesome. I reckon 10 years from now everybody will be renewably powered. Either that or they'll be broke. The word is out there amongst the middle classes that if you stick a battery in, you can save 70% of your energy costs by switching to a time of use tariff. You've got to get on board, Mars, really, honestly. Come along with us. I'll get Neil to give you a hug and we'll get you a battery.
I'll do that, Mars, no problem at all.
If you've got any questions about heat pumps, then you need to join the Renewable Heating Hub forums. You can connect with other homeowners, share experiences, and get advice on heat pumps and renewables. Sign up today and be a part of the conversation. Link in the description. And that's a wrap for today's episode. A huge thank you to our amazing panel, Laurence, Ken, James, and Neil, for sharing their expertise and helping us uncover the most common mistakes in heat pump and battery installations. If you're thinking about going renewable or already have a system in place, we hope this episode has given you the tools to avoid costly errors and get the most out of your investments. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you found this episode helpful, please share it with anyone who might find it beneficial, because nobody should have to learn these lessons the hard way. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.